very hard. Are you really? Don't look at
So that's 7 years.
So I was a close friend of... Hello.
They've been here for the last week, but they have to go back. And I knew when he was doing his PhD in the
What time was the We left to go to the States in the summer.
Yes, I remember we spoke about you talking about
potential farmer. The other deep long-term friendship I want to talk about was with Sam Scott. Sam arrived on the farm in the late 1970s and became the day-to-day manager of the farm, jointly with Mum, of course. Later you will be able to see a picture of Mum in her 70s and Sam in his late 50s doing what they did best, peering at a large bull in the crush in need of some sort of attention. Mum and Sam came from completely different worlds, but they developed a genuinely close friendship that lasted from the time Sam arrived on the farm till a few years ago, when Mum's advancing dementia rendered it increasingly difficult to have meaningful interactions with her. They enjoyed, well, sometimes they endured together, the endless trials and tribulations of jointly managing the farm, especially our farm, which was held together by wire and string, so lots of things broke. They enjoyed talking about politics, about rural life, about the foibles of the rich, powerful and influential, and about a wide range of ethical issues. One of Mum's other admirable attributes was a heightened sensitivity to injustice, and she came to Sam's aid, hiring a prominent Sydney Queen's Counsel to defend Sam against charges that proved unfounded. It's lovely to see May and Orlena here today, who were both close to Sam, and Peter Godby, Sam's stepson, who will speak soon. It's desperately sad to no longer have the mum I remember and cherish, and I often think about how she and Dad would have enjoyed our kids as they've grown up. But I'm comforted by the fact that she had a full and rewarding life. She was brave and strong-willed. She had a wonderful marriage with Fred. She was a great and loyal friend to many. She had a strong intellect and an admirable moral compass, which attracted her to most people who met her. For me, she was a great role model and a wonderful mother. I will miss her terribly. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Emma Gruen to come up and speak.
Good afternoon and thank you for being here today. It certainly means a lot to me and the rest of my family to have so many people come today to reminisce and celebrate my beloved grandmother's long-lived life that sadly ended on Sunday. As many of you may not know me, my name is Emma Gruen and I am Anne's youngest grandchild. Anne was a woman of many wonders. Although I only got to know her in her last years at the farm, the memories I do have of her I will cherish and remember for a long time coming. I think one of my fondest memories I have of her is when we would visit the farm every week or so, and she would be up in her house creating the most scrumptious pumpkin soup. I remember that being the highlight of my visit to the farm, as well as visiting Sam and picking out all the all brown that she always had. Since then, I have always wished to be able to make pumpkin soup as delicious as that. Another one of my memories that I have of Grandma is when she had moved into the Grange and was in her early stages of dementia. She was starting to forget little everyday things, but Dad brought her over to our house one time. It reminded her of this poem, which I will read out soon, and she recited it, top to bottom, with little to no mistakes. I remember sitting there, frankly astonished at how well she remembered this poem, and not everyday routines. Now I will read the poem aloud. I apologize in advance for not memorizing it as she did. The sycophantic fox and the gullible raven. A raven sat upon a tree, and not a word he spoke, for his beak contained a piece of brie, or maybe it was roquefort. We'll make it any kind you please, at all events it was a cheese. Beneath the tree's umbrageous limb, a hungry fox sat smiling. He saw the raven watching him, and spoke in words beguiling. J'admire, said he, ton bleu plumage. The which was simply persiflage. I will stop the poem there, but believe it or not, Grandma recited the 5 subsequent stanzas as well. Frankly, I, like all of you, miss her. She played a large part in my life, and it's hard to let go of someone as special as that. Fortunately, I was right by her side, holding her hand when she took her last moments of life, which was an unusual experience and one I will certainly not forget. She made a mark on everyone she met and taught people many valuable things. So I'd like to thank her for her teachings and memories, and thank all of you for listening to me today and allowing me to share my memories of her. Thank you.
As I was saying, the farm was a big part of Fred and Anne's lives, and especially Anne. Fred was the theoretician, and Anne was the practical one. In the mornings, you know, you might have breakfast, but she'd be on to you about going and go around the farm, get in the truck, and let's go and look at cattle. So I'd like to, on that note, ask Peter Cobby to come up and speak.
I'd really like to thank David and Nikki for giving me the opportunity, because we've spent a lot of time at the Gruen farm, and I'd like to speak on behalf of my whole family, because our family has been on this farm for 36 years, so it's a long time and a big part of their lives. And my mother May and my stepfather Sam, they formed a special bond with Mr. and Mrs. Gruen. Mrs. Gruen and Sam, friendship. It was fed by the love of the land, politics, and a deep respect for each other. They may as well have been born on different planets, because they came from such different backgrounds. Sam from Queensland, but they watched out for each other right until the end. Sam passed away late last year. I'm sure Mrs. Gruen just stayed around just to keep an eye on him. Some of my fondest memories was doing the cattle work, which was always end up with Mr. and Mrs. Gruen arguing over what procedure should reach the optimum result. And 9 times out of 10, Mr. Gruen was told to get on his motorbike and go and check the boundaries. After that, it usually ran a bit smoother. Our family was always, to our family, she was always Mrs. Gruen. That's why I've never called her Anne, because she never asked us to call her Anne. But it was not that, it was through respect, and we loved her very much. And it was a privilege to be a part of her life and her a part of ours. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the juncture where you can come up and say anything. I know that my little boy Alexander might want to read out an email. And after that, you're welcome to come forward and say a few words. So Alexander, you want to kick that off?
So this is just an email from my sister Anna, who is overseas, so couldn't be here today, but this is just what she wanted to say. I was one of the very fortunate children in this world to grow up knowing most of my grandparents very well. I have very fond memories of Grandma as I reflect back on countless Saturdays spent roaming the farm, eating her signature soups for lunch, always followed up with a tea and a Tim Tam before setting up the bridge table to get playing. But bridge was not the only thing I learned from Grandma. I learned from speaking to her and from watching the way she interacted with others, how important it was to be modest and to think about the world around you. I distinctly remember the little save the ABC signs stuck up around the house before I even knew what that meant. I will always keep her with me as I remember the importance of helping others, the joy in reading and learning, and a sense of duty to make the most of my education to make a positive difference.
Remember Anne for her wit, warm, and wonderful friendship with my mother for must have been well over 50 years. Anne and Fred and Win and John were part of what in the early days was a much smaller circle of Canberra people, you know, very much but really close bonds, and that they formed in the days when it was a much smaller community. One of my early memories is visiting the Gruen's farm in Tuggeranong with Mum and Dad, and Nick and David were there playing, and I was a few years younger than them, playing some board game, which was incredibly impressive, and it might have been some sort of soccer game, but it made its mark on me, this sort of intense, closely bonded family, and I think I even noticed then the rivalry between Nick and David. David mentioned the brown bag lunch group. My memory of it was called the women's group or something like that, but they used to meet, it seemed like every month right through my life until Mum a few years ago also started to suffer from dementia, but it seemed it was just a very, very important regular part of all their lives. And you know, as a young, you know, from a very young age, I remember these fascinating and worldly discussions that sort of ranged over all the world's affairs and the nation's affairs, as well as the affairs of closer to home. And you know, I remember just often straying to farming, because my dad was a farmer, so you know, I think he and Anne would swap notes about the state of perhaps the weather. But finally, just Anne, like my mum, was one of these, you know, an incredibly talented, impressive woman with you know, the fantastic intellect and wisdom, which you did, from today's perspective, you did feel was not able to reach its full potential just because of the constraints that were around then. But above all, I just remember Anne's impressive wisdom and warmth, sort of the two sides of her personality.
Sorry, I'm a little short. My name is Bruce Chapman. I'm an economist. I work at the Australian National University. My first boss, and what a wonderful boss he was Fred Gruen, who I completely adored. And he was my mentor and my role model, and all our hearts were broken when Fred died in 1997. When he died, Anne wanted to leave a legacy to the Australian National University, which became a research fund for the Research School of Social Sciences. Professor Bob Gregory, with great manipulation, cunning and sleight of hand, turned a considerable financial resource into quite an important fortune in various ways by the manipulation of university rules, and through that endowment there were many great economists, Australian and other economists, who benefited and still do benefit from that contribution, from that legacy, and I include Paul Fridas, Alison Booth, Andrew Lee. So this is really on the theme of Anne's generosity, which was also true of Fred, and it's been an incredibly important legacy. Bob Gregory is overseas, but I know he would want me to have said that, to acknowledge that. She was such an impressive person. She was so charismatic. I was a bit scared of her in a way, because she just seemed to be so sharp. But with that kind of tough mind, there was a tenderness there which I think we all appreciated and cared about. Last year, we moved a print of a portrait taken of Fred Gruen when he was in Hay, after he arrived in Australia at about the age of 17 or 18, and we had a ceremony at the ANU because we thought the right place for this painting was at the ANU, because Fred was so important. He was the critical economist, the great economics leader of, in my view, of his generation Australia-wide. And so we did have a ceremony where we had a print done. The portrait itself was too kind of old to be hung anywhere, but we did have a print made and we celebrated it. And I remember speaking at that occasion and looking out, and there was two of my favourite bros, Nick and David, with their families and their wonderful children. And when I thought about the legacy, there it was in that room. I see it in this room too. It's a wonderful memory, and I know there'll be great sadness, but what a contribution. Thank you, Anne.
Hi, I'm Angus. I was Anne's, David's son. I just wanted to share a couple of memories that I really kind of associated grandma with. And so the first one would have occurred when I would have been 5 or 6 roughly. And at that stage we were living down in Sydney, and every 2 or 3 months we'd go hop in the car on a Saturday afternoon and make the 3-hour drive down to Canberra. And I remember several things about that, one of which was the drive never quite lasted 3 hours. It always went a little bit faster than usual. And then we'd come up to this farm, to the farm at Bullock, and it would be generally reasonably pitch black, with 5 or 6, and we'd drive up to the house on the hill, and I'd always kind of race through the door and run down the hallway, because I was such a good kid, and always sitting on top of the stove waiting for us would be a pot of soup bubbling away. And I remember really looking forward to kind of getting there and talking to her and just eating the soup. And then and then kind of hanging out on the farm for the next day and just kind of looking around, kind of because I've always enjoyed wandering, and I could kind of sit on the farm and just go for hour, 2 hour long wanders through the bush, occasionally getting lost, terrifying parents. But I'm still here today, so I'm okay. And anyway, kind of after that we moved to Canberra, and we still would go up, we visited Anne much more regularly. Then we'd go once or twice a month, and I'd always remember kind of there'd always be soup waiting there or some sort of delicious dinner. But then as she got older, she obviously lost her license, and she had to move into the Grange. And it turned out, luckily, that at that time I was going to a high school that was just a couple of streets away. So I used to visit her once or twice a week from about year 7 through year 10. And I always come after school, we kind of sit down and have tea and biscuits together. And it was really lovely kind of to get to talk with her and understand, kind of get her point of view on things. She was a really nice person, and very giving, very generous. And I was really looked forward to those days where I could hang out with Anne and eat Tim Tams usually. Tim Tams and tea. Yeah. And then the final brief story I want to tell was after Anne had dementia, she obviously didn't perk up as much. She was kind of contained within herself. She sometimes wouldn't wake up, but you could kind of visit her and try and talk to her, and she'd try and get her to respond. And I just remember going about 6 months back, turning up there with Nick. Nick brought a package of shrimp, prawns, which he'd gotten because he remembered that Anne used to enjoy them. And I remember Anne would be lying down in her bed, and she'd generally try and talk to her, and she'd kind of nod or wave a little bit. But when Nick brought out the prawns, you could almost see her start smiling, and she devoured them. He had a couple 100 grams of prawns, and Anne was very happy to eat every last one of them. And it was really nice to kind of seeing how happy she still was, even though she sometimes didn't remember. When she kind of did, she was always very, very nice and very great to be around. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was very good. I saw Anne in the home probably about 3 years ago, and we had a chat, and she said, "Johnny," oh yes, and she just came to life for a little while and said, "Now, who was that little boy you played with?" That little boy was Nicholas Gruen. So there's lots of stories, but I'll invite Nicholas up to wrap the show.
Thanks very much, John. Now, John was called Johnny, I was called Nicky. John's mother called him Johnny Dean, and when my daughter was born, I introduced her to John as Johnny Dean, whereupon he became Johnny Demon. So you've been hearing from Johnny Demon this afternoon. Mum was born in Leeds, England on the 4th of November 1922, and as a baby lived in a nice house called Corby Steps. With Australian parents, and indeed Australian grandparents and great-grandparents, she was a distant relative of Banjo Patterson. What was Mum doing in Leeds? Her father, Roy Darville, sought to enlist in the British Army as something better than the Australian Army. Not the only misjudgment that Roy made in his life. Mum was an only child. Actually, she wasn't exactly. In fact, she'd had an older brother who died very young, so she was a treasured child. Like most young girls, Mum loved her dad. She'd go surf fishing with him. At dusk, the tailor would run. You had just a minute or two. The faster you could cast your line into the water, the faster the fish jumped on your line. So, in a social event of great excitement, Mum would wait behind her dad and the other men and get her dad's hooks and lines ready. Once he'd reel in the line, she'd be ready so her dad could cast the next one into the surf. When I was a kid, Mum would tell us that Taylor tasted the best. She'd look out for it in the shops. It was quite seasonal and had a special way of cooking them, lightly smeared with butter, wrapped in clean brown paper and baked in the oven. Delicious. Roy's wife, my mother's mother, Margaret Georgina Dalrymple, born Dalrymple, married as Darville, was better off, better educated and better with people than her husband. In temperament, Mum took after her dad. Her mother was soft, elusive and often oblique, playful. Mum was more matter of fact, a dutiful daughter. She was both a keen and lively observer of others and solicitous of their interests. But for whatever reason, she told me that her mother didn't much like her. At least in her own mind, she was not charming to her mother. My friend Clive pointed out that Mum and Dad's relationship had an unusual kind of inversion to it. Perhaps a little like Mum's parents, Roy and Margaret, but the other way around. Dad was the one who cared more about his appearance. He was the charmer and the more extravagant on a shopping trip, I can assure you of that. Mum was the sensible one. She was impatient with overdone femininity. Indeed, she didn't much like the word. She didn't like fashion. She would occasionally refer to a woman who had put on some show of temperament as having a fit of the vapours. She, unlike all my school friends' mums, she didn't read the Woman's Weekly, and she couldn't stand the Women's Day. Dad liked the civility of the inner city. Mum was more at home in the paddock and was never more at home than when she was helping with a carving in the yards. But one fact about Mum defied all this. Mum was a great crier. I have no recollection of her ever crying out of self-pity, but she was often moved to tears. Before the dark deed is done in Julius Caesar, the lean and hungry Cassius says to the strong and noble Brutus, "Forever and forever farewell." Mum cried. As I came to know them, there was a pattern to those tears. She was moved to tears by acts of pure courage and kindness. She was moved to tears by the incomprehensible suffering of good men who had gone bravely and fecklessly off to World War I to be engulfed by the madness and the death and the slaughter. Men like her father, of whom she was proud, for lasting 9 months in charge of his men, when the average life expectancy of an officer of his rank in the trenches on the Western Front at that time was 2 weeks. When I was 13 or so, and Mum arranged for us all to attend a lecture against the Vietnam War by the author of The Owner's Manual for Babies, Dr. Benjamin Spock, as we waited in line, I remember wondering whether Mum was smiling or grimacing at some men in khaki uniforms. Then her face flushed and she burst into tears. They were neo-Nazis. She lost it again a few years later as the Nazi exultation swelled, as the young Aryan boy sang "Tomorrow Belongs to Me" in the film Cabaret. Mum had a real thing about the Nazis and the slaughter of the Jews, much more evidently so than Dad. Her most surreal assertion of this occurred one afternoon at the farm with me and her newly minted daughter-in-law, Jenny. During a nice afternoon tea, Mum steered the conversation toward the Holocaust. The temperature kept rising. She described the fate of Dad's mum, Marianne, being taken to Theresen. Jenny was sipping on her cuppa, wondering where to look. But Mum went on. With all hope gone and just months left in the war, Marianne was taken to the slaughter. And on she went through, forced herself to go through hysterical tears. Jenny, I'd like to extend to you the family's apologies. She sat there stunned and lost for words. I sat there similarly lost for words, but not unfamiliar with this quirk. I was thinking, Jenny, welcome to the family. Meet the Fockers. Of course, this sort of behaviour was incredibly rare and also incredibly raw when it broke out. I spent many years wondering about it. And of course, one can never know, but I think it's pretty obvious that Mum couldn't bear the idea of the utterly gratuitous malice towards someone as nice, and it has to be said, as innocent of malice as my father. And I think there was something more. You see, when Mum married Dad, she had to make a great choice. It sounds melodramatic, but it is also entirely truthful to say that as she reached early adulthood, she had to choose which of the two men she loved the most she would betray. Because for all his protectiveness of her and all her love of him, marrying Dad would be the ultimate humiliation for her father. For his politics were virulently hostile to her having anything to do with, let alone marrying a European Jewish refugee. You've heard from David the reaction of her more urbane and sophisticated mother, who found it even easier to accept and ultimately to quite quickly approve of the marriage. Her father wrote her a long aggrieved letter, which nevertheless offered her his resigned blessing. What choice did he have? Where the marriage documents called for Roy to nominate his occupation, Roy wrote, gentleman. He was unemployed. Until Mum met Dad, she'd given little thought to the casual anti-Semitism of the middle-class milieu into which she was born. All her life, I think Mum was asking how it could be that her father, a man of great natural intelligence whom she loved so much, could be such an active part of something so stupid and so terrible and so cruel. For the whole time of her life as a widow, she gave thanks to the man she married, commenting often that she was in danger of canonising him. It was the great event of her life. Perhaps she was grateful not just for how good he was to her, not that she wasn't just as good to him, but also because of the risk she took, a risk that paid off. One night, over one of the dinners we shared in the retirement village, the Gruen, she told me that she always remembered something from her wedding. The story of Ruth from the Old Testament. I presume it was in the sermon, and one can see its relevance to her wedding. Ruth follows Naomi back to Bethlehem, leaving her own people and saying to Naomi, thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. She said she didn't know quite why, but that the thought has always comforted her. Rather as the case when Dad died, the vehemence of people's fondness for my mum takes me aback. Children can't help taking for granted the accomplishments of their parents. Hope you listen, children. Even as others look on them with awe. Those achievements are simply the way things are, the backdrop of their children's lives. Mum's greatest talent was her talent for friendship. She loved a picture. Now I've got another name for that group, the Cup Lunch Ladies, and I'm prepared to, there you are, the Cup Lunch Ladies. A group of 5 friends who met over cup lunches. Over cup lunches they were bought. They included, in rough order of the roll call, as Mum farewelled them, Netta Burns, Pat Horner, Roxy Booker and Hilary Webster. Mum missed them all as they departed this world. These friends and others she had for decades, but she also kept friends from her childhood. Pat Visser was one, but the 2 she saw most of were Margie Bell and Jodie Russell, both of whom survive her, and the absolute fondest welcoming to Margie, who is with us today. She was a friend to people she didn't know well, and to some who received help from her now and again, sometimes anonymously. And the kindness of her actions and the steadfastness of her friendship changed the course of a few lives profoundly for the better, which is as much as any of us can hope for on our time here on earth. I might say, I was worried I wouldn't have enough time, but people have been quite quick. So I just want to, I want to just say one thing that hasn't been said about Sam. When Sam was wrongly accused, you've heard what Mum did to make sure that he was not convicted. And Sam had a policeman who had an in for him, I think in Yass. And he said, and Sam told the story of this policeman saying to him, "Sam, I don't know how you got off, I don't know how you got Tony Belanto to defend you." And Sam said to him, "Well, some of us have got friends," he said. "Some of us have got friends." And Sam was a ferociously loyal friend to Mum, and she to him, and it has to be acknowledged, not just that fact, but the fact that Sam visited Mum every week that he was able to throughout her years at the Grange. When she was able, he would come in, I think it was a Wednesday afternoon, Sam would come in and drive Mum out to the farm, and I'm sure Mum had plenty to say about which cows were in which paddock. And of course, David forgot to mention that there is something else that can be wrong if for the previous 4 months you've complained there isn't enough rain and there is now rain, and that is that there is too much rain. And perhaps there was some of that sort of talk as well. I recall returning home from a long drive up from Melbourne, no matter how hard things were for Mum, looking after Dad or herself after Dad had gone. Whenever I arrived, and no matter what season, Mum had left flowers from the garden, or if there were none, some sprigs of native plants in a vase by the side of the bed. As the author Gillian Boris observes in her own memoir recounting similar acts of grace, nobody looks after you the way your mother does. I went to see Mum about an hour ago and saw her last Friday, having been warned of her state, and it's not clear what you do with someone who is not conscious, is on morphine, and stops breathing for 2 or 3 minutes at a time and goes on breathing again. But one thing I did remember, and I was glad, I might say, that before then I was able to take her prawns. I hadn't made the connection until Angus spoke with the seafood side of my own speech today. But I'm glad that I thought of that, because that really did perk Mum up. But when I was a little kid, Mum used to ask me to, she would sit me on a chair, we would watch the TV, Mum would sit on the floor, and she would ask me to comb her hair and tickle her face again and again and again. Well, a young boy gets bored with doing that, and I never tickled her face or combed her hair enough. I have a kind of it's a very low level guilt, but I do have a guilt that I was a little more hyperactive than maybe Mum would have liked. And one other slight aside was that the reason Mum liked Johnny was that when Mum said, "Let's go and do the hay," Johnny loved doing the hay. And baler twine really hurts. They're very heavy, and it's kind of fun for the first 2 or 3 bales of hay. John liked them up to 20, 30, 40 bales of hay. It was really getting there. So there you are. But when I saw her an hour ago, I combed her hair, tickled her face, and and there you are. She's now part of the inanimate world. Nothing changed. It's all now in our minds to think about Mum. So thank you all for coming today to help us bid my Mum goodbye forever and forever. Farewell.
Thank you, Nicholas. Now we're just going to have a few slides and some music, and I'd like you to just take a moment to pause and reflect on Anne's life. That should only be a few minutes.
The way you wear your hat, the way